Welcome back, everybody, for another deep dive, this time into something that affects every single one of us, whether we realize it or not.
That's right.
And that is legal protections surrounding disability rights.
Yeah.
We're going to explore a current lawsuit called Texas v. Becerra and how this lawsuit could potentially unravel those protections, leaving millions of people vulnerable.
Yeah, and what's really interesting about this deep dive is that it all starts with something we can all relate to, and that is chance.
Chance.
Yes, chance, a split-second decision when you're driving a medical condition that could be made worse by, genetics you didn't know about, or even something as seemingly small as a teacher resigning in the middle of the school year,
Yeah.
impacting a student's education. These chance events, as Dr. Howie Knoff points out in his blog post, can really drastically alter lives, leading to disabilities that no one planned for.
Okay, I see where you're going with this. These chance events could happen to anyone at any time.
Exactly.
But how does this tie into the legal protections we were just discussing?
Well, for over 50 years, Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act of 1973 has acted as a safety net protecting millions of Americans from discrimination based on disability.
Okay.
It covers a wide range of disabilities, learning disabilities, mental health conditions, physical impairments, sensory impairments. Essentially, if it substantially limits a major life activity, Section 504 is there to protect you.
So it's not just about protecting people with disabilities they've had since birth.
Right.
This law recognizes that disability can happen to anyone at any point in life
Exactly.
due to these chance events that we were talking about.
That's right. And the protection isn't just some vague concept either.
Okay.
Section 504 guarantees concrete benefits.
Like what?
Accommodations in schools and workplaces, accessibility to public spaces, equal opportunities across the board. It ensures that people with disabilities are not excluded or denied benefits simply because of their disability.
And this is the law that's potentially under threat from the Texas v. Becerra lawsuit?
Yes, on the surface, the lawsuit is challenging the inclusion of gender dysphoria as a disability under Section 504.
Okay.
But what's concerning is a clause that seeks to declare the entirety of Section 504 unconstitutional.
So while the debate surrounding gender dysphoria and its classification as a disability is certainly valid,
Sure.
this lawsuit seems to be aiming for something much bigger.
Yeah.
It's trying to dismantle a law that's been protecting millions of Americans for decades.
Right, and that's where the potential impact becomes truly alarming. Dr. Mott points out that 1.6 million students currently receiving support through 504 plans could lose those protections.
Wow, that's a huge number.
It is a staggering number.
But I have to admit, I'm struggling to grasp at the true scale of what that means.
Sure.
1.6 million is a big number.
Yes.
But how does that translate to real-world impact?
Well, imagine a school suddenly unable to provide necessary accommodations for students with disabilities.
Okay.
We're talking about things like modified assignments, assistive technology, extra time on tests, even access to things like ramps and elevators.
Right.
These are crucial supports that allow students with disabilities to participate fully in their education.
And without those supports, what happens to those students?
Exactly.
Their education, their future opportunities, it all seems so incredibly vulnerable.
It is, and it's not just about education either. Section 504 also covers employment health care and access to public services.
Okay.
Taking it away would impact people with disabilities across all aspects of life.
Okay, so we've established that this lawsuit could have massive consequences, but
Right.
isn't it focused on students? How does this affect the average person,
Right.
someone who maybe doesn't even identify as disabled right now?
That's where the concept of chance comes back into play. Remember, anyone can become disabled at any moment due to a sudden illness, an accident, or any number of unforeseen circumstances. You might not think you need these protections today, but what about tomorrow? Dr. Knopf uses a really powerful analogy in his blog post to illustrate just how many people could be affected by this.
Okay.
He compares that 1.6 million students that could potentially be impacted by this lawsuit to the number of Americans that died from COVID-19.
Oh, wow. That really puts things into perspective.
Right.
It's a stark reminder of just how widespread the consequences could be if this lawsuit succeeds.
Yeah, and remember, this isn't just about those currently receiving support.
Right.
It's about future generations as well. Imagine someone who becomes disabled 5, 10, 20 years from now. If this lawsuit succeeds, they wouldn't have the same legal protections that they have today.
So it's like we're teetering on the edge of a cliff, and this lawsuit could push us back into a time when people with disabilities faced much greater barriers to participation and inclusion.
That's a good way to put it. And, it's not just about individual hardship. It's about what kind of society we want to be.
Yeah.
Do we want to be a society that values inclusivity and equal opportunity for all, or one that turns back the clock on progress?
That raises an interesting question about the arguments being made in the lawsuit itself.
Sure.
You mentioned that it challenges the inclusion of gender dysphoria as a disability under Section 504.
Yeah.
What's the reasoning behind that challenge?
Well, the argument really hinges on the interpretation of disability
Okay.
and whether gender dysphoria fits within that definition. It's a complex issue with valid points on both sides.
Mm-hmm.
Some argue that gender dysphoria should be included because it can significantly impact a person's ability to function in various areas of life.
Right.
Others argue that it doesn't meet the criteria for a disability under the law.
Okay, so there's a genuine legal debate happening here.
Yes?
But if I'm understanding this correctly, Dr. Knopf's concern is that even if there are valid arguments against including gender dysphoria, that doesn't justify dismantling the entire law.
Exactly. He argues that challenging that specific aspect of these updated rules is one thing.
Right.
Attempting to declare the entirety of Section 504 unconstitutional because of it is a completely different proposition.
Yeah.
It's like using a scalpel to perform surgery and ending up demolishing the entire operating room.
That's a very vivid analogy.
Yeah.
So what's the alternative? What's the appropriate way to address concerns
Well,
about specific inclusions or interpretations of Section 504?
legal challenges, can be focused on specific aspects of the law or its implementation.
Okay.
There are ways to seek clarification or modification without throwing out the entire thing.
Right.
And that's what Dr. Knopf is really advocating for here, a more nuanced and targeted approach that addresses the specific concerns without jeopardizing the entire framework of disability rights.
It seems like this case really highlights the importance of understanding the potential consequences of legal actions.
Absolutely.
Sometimes a narrow focus can have these unintended, widespread repercussions.
It certainly does, and it also emphasizes the power of individual voices in shaping those outcomes. Dr. Knopf doesn't just raise concerns in his blog post.
Right.
He also offers a call to action.
What kind of action can people take? Well, it often feels like these legal battles are happening in a sphere that's so far removed from our daily lives.
You'd be surprised at the impact we can have. Dr. Knopf suggests contacting governors and state attorneys general to express concern about the lawsuit.
Okay.
Particularly the plea to declare Section 504 unconstitutional.
So if someone's listening to this and they're thinking, this is concerning, but what can I actually do about it? Contacting their elected officials is a tangible step.
Absolutely.
That they can take.
And, if you live in one of the 17 states involved in the lawsuit, maybe your attorney general will reconsider their position if you're in a different state. Perhaps your attorney general will join the fight to protect Section 504.
Yeah.
Every voice adds to the chorus, calling for the preservation of these really vital protections.
This reminds me of something you mentioned earlier about chance events and how anyone could become disabled at any moment.
Right.
It makes this whole discussion feel much more personal.
Sure.
It's not just about advocating for others. It's about recognizing that we could be advocating for ourselves or our loved ones someday.
That's a crucial point, and Dr. Knopf shares some personal anecdotes in his blog post that really drive that home. He mentions cases where not just the students, but even the parents involved in these, chance events ended up with disabilities.
Oh, wow.
It just emphasizes how unpredictable life can be and how these protections can become essential for anyone.
It sounds like these personal stories add another layer of understanding to this whole issue.
Yeah.
Statistics are powerful, but hearing about real people, real families who have relied on Section 504, that's what makes it really resonate.
It does, and it brings us back to that core idea. Everyone is potentially at risk.
Yeah.
This lawsuit isn't just about them, it's about all of us.
Right.
Including you, the listener.
So what are some key takeaways we want listeners to walk away with from this deep dive?
Well,
we've covered a lot of ground, from chance events to legal arguments to personal stories.
Yeah.
What's the core message here?
I think the core message is that disability rights are under threat in a way that could have far-reaching consequences for everyone. This isn't just some abstract legal battle. It's about real people's lives, their education, their livelihoods, their access to healthcare and essential services, and the potential loss of these protections could impact anyone at any time due to the, unpredictable nature of life itself.
It sounds like we need to be much more aware of the fragility of these rights.
Yes.
And much more active in protecting them.
Exactly. We can't afford to be complacent. We need to be informed, engaged, and willing to speak up. Our collective well-being depends on it.
It's interesting that this lawsuit comes just after the Biden administration's updates to Section 504.
Yeah.
Back in 2024, those updates were meant to strengthen the protections and align them more closely with the Americans with Disabilities Act.
Yeah, it does seem like a peculiar turn of events. As soon as the laws reinforce, we have this challenge emerge that aims to dismantle it entirely. The timing is certainly noteworthy.
And as we discussed earlier, the lawsuit hinges on the argument that including gender dysphoria as a disability was an overreach of executive power.
Yeah.
While there might be legal merit to that argument, going from challenging a specific inclusion to declaring the whole law unconstitutional seems like a pretty extreme leap.
It does make you wonder if the challenge to gender dysphoria is truly the core issue here, or simply a smokescreen for a broader attack on disability rights. It raises questions about the motivations behind the lawsuit.
It reminds me of that case that Dr. Knopf mentions in his blog post, the federal judge in Kentucky who struck down the Biden administration's Title IX rules.
Yeah.
He felt the president had overstepped his authority, but in that case, the previous version of Title IX remained in effect.
That's an important distinction. Even if a court agrees that including gender dysphoria was an overreach that doesn't automatically invalidate the entire law, they could potentially strike down that specific aspect while leaving the rest of Section 504 intact.
So applying that logic to the Texas v. Becerra case, there's a possibility that even if the court sides with the plaintiffs on the gender dysphoria issue, Section 504 could still survive,
Right.
albeit in a modified form.
Precisely. And that's why Dr. Knopf argues for a more targeted approach. If the goal is to correct a perceived legal misstep, focus on that specific aspect. Don't use it as an excuse to dismantle an entire law that has been protecting millions of people for decades.
This whole discussion really highlights the unpredictable nature of life and how any one of us could find ourselves needing the protections of Section 504 at some point.
Absolutely.
It really reinforces the importance of safeguarding these rights, not just for others, but for ourselves as well.
It's about recognizing that disability is not some distant concept that only affects them. It's a human experience that can touch anyone's life, often when we least expect it. And Section 504 acknowledges that reality and provides a safety net, ensuring that even when life throws those curveballs, we have a legal framework to guarantee equal opportunity and access.
It's a powerful reminder that disability rights are human rights, and we have a collective responsibility to protect them.
Yes.
As we wrap up this deep dive, what's the one key takeaway you want our listeners to remember?
I would say the most crucial point is that we can't take these protections for granted.
Yeah.
We need to be informed about the potential threats to disability rights and actively engaged in safeguarding them, whether it's contacting your elected officials, supporting advocacy organizations, or simply having conversations about these issues with your friends and family.
Right.
Every action, no matter how small, contributes to the fight for a more inclusive and equitable society for all.
So as Dr. Knopf suggests, it's time for each of us to ask ourselves, what role will I play in ensuring that everyone has the opportunity to thrive regardless of their abilities or disabilities?
That's the question we all need to grapple with. The future of disability rights, and indeed the very fabric of a just and compassionate society, may depend on the answer.